He thought he was protecting his farm, by setting a trap. But when the farmer raised his shotgun, he saw something that changed everything. Not teeth. Not rage. But eyes, filled with fear. And 3 tiny shadows watching from the trees. This is the true story of a man who went to kill a predator, and met a protector instead. The morning sky was still dark when the scream shattered the silence. Hank Morris jumped up in bed, heart pounding, shotgun already in hand. It wasn't the wind or the howling coyotes that woke him this time, it was that cry. High-pitched, sharp, and too close to be from the woods. Something was wrong. He threw on his boots and coat, cursing under his breath. By the time he reached the barnyard, the early light of dawn was spilling over the hills. But it wasn't enough to hide the blood. Pearl, his best goat, his favorite goat, was dead. Throat ripped open. Blood soaking the earth. Her wide eyes stared toward the trees like she saw something Hank couldn't. Hank dropped to his knees beside her. His jaw clenched, eyes burning, not with tears, but with rage. He didn't need a tracker to tell him who was responsible. He'd seen the claw marks on the coop weeks ago. The shredded fence. The paw prints near the stream. A bobcat, he spat. It's that damn bobcat. This wasn't the first kill. 2 chickens had vanished earlier that week. A sheep had gone missing a month ago. But now it was different. Now it was Pearl. And that meant war. Hank Morris was known around Cold Hollow as a quiet man. Kept to himself. Tended his farm, worked his land, didn't bother with town gossip or Sunday service. Folks said he was kind once, but ever since his wife passed, he'd turned colder than the soil in January. He wasn't cruel, just hard. But now, as he stood over Pearl's lifeless body, the cold in him turned to steel. He wasn't about to let some wild animal tear through his farm like it owned the place. By noon, Hank had dragged out the old iron trap from the shed. It was heavy and rusted, but still worked. He cleaned it, tested the springs, and oiled the teeth until they gleamed like a knife's edge. Then he set it. Right on the edge of the woods where he'd seen the tracks last week. He baited it with raw chicken and covered it with dry leaves and pine needles. "Come on, then," he muttered. "Let's see how brave you really are." That night, he sat on the porch, shotgun across his lap, watching the tree line. The wind was bitter. Stars hung above like frozen pinpricks in the sky. Hours passed. Nothing moved. Until it did. Snap. The sound came just before dawn. Hank sprang from his chair, heart hammering. He grabbed his flashlight and shotgun and ran toward the trees. There, in the dim gray of morning, the trap had done its job. The bobcat was caught. It was smaller than he expected. Lean. Muscular. Its golden fur streaked with blood from where the trap bit into its back leg. But its eyes, God, those eyes, burned like fire. Wide. Angry. Scared. It didn't snarl. Didn't hiss. It just stared. Hank raised the shotgun. "This is what you get," he said softly. "For Pearl. For the chickens. For everything." But something strange happened. The bobcat didn't fight. It didn't try to run, or claw at the trap, or bare its teeth. It just watched him. Like it was waiting. Then he saw something move behind the trees. A flicker. 3 shadows. Small. Curious. Kittens. The bobcat was a mother. Hank felt the blood drain from his face. The gun trembled in his hands. He looked back at her. Her breathing was shallow. Her leg, clearly broken. But she wasn't trying to protect herself. She was staying still so her kits wouldn't get scared. For a long moment, Hank stood frozen. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. His heart was thudding hard in his chest as he knelt beside her. She didn't flinch. Didn't growl. Just blinked, once. It took him 10 minutes to unlock the trap. The old springs were stiff. Her blood made the metal slippery. But finally, it clicked open. The bobcat didn't run. She limped back a few steps, looked over her shoulder at the trees, where the kittens waited, and then disappeared. Into the forest with them. Hank stayed there a long time, sitting in the dirt beside the bloody trap. He'd never felt that way before. Not pity. Not fear. Something else. Something he couldn't name. He didn't speak a word of it to anyone. Not the next day, or the one after. He buried Pearl quietly. Tossed the trap into the river that ran behind the orchard. Watched it sink. Watched the water carry it away. But the image of those golden eyes wouldn't leave him. Each night, he scanned the woods. Half expecting her to come back. Half hoping she would. And then, something changed. No more dead chickens. No more goat screams. But the tracks stayed. Fresh bobcat prints in the morning frost. Circling the coop. Around the goat pen. Along the barn wall. As if, someone was watching over the place. And Hank, for reasons he didn't fully understand, began leaving scraps of meat on the tree stump near the woods. Every morning, they were gone. No mess. No feathers. Just gone. The bobcat never showed herself. But he knew it was her. He could feel it. And something inside him, something long asleep, had started to stir. Winter came early that year. The trees turned bare quicker than usual, and the wind cut sharper through the valley. Snow dusted the fields before Thanksgiving, turning the earth white and quiet. But life on Hank's farm didn't stop. Animals needed feeding. Fences needed mending. The old farmer's knees ached more than ever, but he kept moving. And every morning, before anything else, he checked the tree stump. The raw meat he left there was always gone. Sometimes he found prints, light ones, barely pressing into the snow. Bobcat. Small ones too, like little stars beside hers. The kittens were growing. He never saw her, not clearly. But once, just once, he caught a glimpse. It was dusk. Hank was stacking firewood when he heard a rustle near the barn. He turned quickly, expecting a raccoon or rabbit, but instead, he saw her. Just beyond the fence, standing still in the snow. The bobcat. Her leg still had a slight limp, but she looked stronger now. Fur fuller. Eyes sharp and clear. She didn't move. Neither did Hank. They stood frozen in silence, snowflakes falling between them. Then, slowly, she turned and padded back into the trees, vanishing like a ghost. He didn't follow. He didn't have to. One night, in late December, Hank was woken by a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Snarling. This wasn't a goat crying. This was different. Low. Violent. Animalistic. He sat up in bed, then grabbed his coat and flashlight and hurried outside. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he ran toward the barn. What he saw made his stomach drop. 2 coyotes were circling the goat pen, teeth bared, eyes glowing in the dark. One was already inside the fence. The others snapped and lunged, trying to push through the gate. And standing between them and his animals, was her. The bobcat. She stood low, claws out, back arched. Her growl was deep and guttural. A warning. But the coyotes weren't scared. They were hungry. One lunged. The bobcat met it in midair. The two animals rolled across the snow in a blur of fur and fangs. The coyote yelped, trying to bite, but the bobcat was faster. More focused. She slashed at his face, catching an eye. The coyote howled and bolted into the woods. The other coyote hesitated. Then ran too. And just like that, it was over. Hank stood there, shotgun in hand, breathing hard. The bobcat limped away from the goat pen, bleeding from her shoulder. She turned her head toward Hank. For a moment, her eyes locked on his. Then she disappeared into the woods. The next morning, Hank did something he never thought he'd do. He called the local vet. "There's a wild bobcat," he said. "She's injured. Protected my livestock from coyotes last night." There was a pause on the line. "And you want her, what? Taken away?" "No," Hank said quietly. "I want her safe." The vet didn't believe him at first. But Hank insisted. Told her everything. 2 days later, Dr. Sutton showed up with a tranquilizer gun and a small team. They waited on the porch as Hank placed a plate of meat just inside the tree line. It took hours. Then, from the shadows, she appeared. Wounded, tired, but proud. She didn't run. She just stood there, staring. The vet aimed. The dart struck clean. The bobcat flinched, then slumped slowly to the ground. They carried her to the truck. 3-week stay, Dr. Sutton promised. Stitches. Rest. Then we release her right back here. Hank nodded, but a lump formed in his throat as they drove away. The woods felt emptier. 3 weeks passed like winter storms, slow, cold, and quiet. Hank still left food on the stump. He even scattered bits for the kittens, though he never saw them. Then one morning, a note appeared on his porch. "She's healed. Releasing her today. Just after dusk." That evening, Hank waited at the edge of the orchard. No shotgun. Just a thick coat and 2 pieces of raw chicken in his coat pocket. The truck pulled up silently. They opened the crate. She stepped out. At first, she didn't see him. She sniffed the snow, took a few careful steps. Then she looked up, and froze. Her eyes met Hank's. He didn't move. Just reached into his coat and dropped the chicken at his feet. The bobcat stared for a few seconds longer. Then, slowly, she walked past him. So close he could hear her breathing. She didn't take the meat. She didn't need it anymore. She was home. That night, Hank lit the fireplace and sat with a quiet heart. He didn't fully understand what had happened. But deep down, something in him had shifted. The farm didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Protected. Alive. January passed in quiet beauty. Snow blanketed the hills like a thick white quilt. Trees stood bare and frozen, while the wind moved slowly through Cold Hollow, as if even it was careful not to disturb the peace. The old farm stood steady through the cold, animals fed and healthy, fences strong. But it wasn't just the animals who were protected. Hank Morris had changed. Each morning now, he walked to the edge of the woods and left something small, raw chicken, rabbit meat, or sometimes just bones. Not out of fear. Not because he needed protection. But because it felt right. And some mornings, there were tracks again. Lighter now. More spread out. The bobcat, and her kittens, were still nearby. Still watching. But it wasn't until mid-February that he truly realized how much their silent connection had grown. It was a bitter cold morning, the kind that cracks your skin and stiffens your bones. Hank had just stepped outside with a pail of water for the goats when he saw the prints. Deep. Fresh. Not bobcat. Boots. He followed them, cautiously. They came from the road and led up to the edge of the fence, right near the chicken coop. Then they stopped. He knelt, heart suddenly tense. There were cigarette butts in the snow. A beer can crushed into the ice. And one more thing, something that made his stomach twist. A large, metal spring-loaded trap. New. Shiny. Cruel. It was hidden behind a bush. Ready. Waiting. Poachers, he muttered, voice shaking. They must have come during the night. Left a trap for the bobcat. Maybe more. His mind raced. Not just for her, but for her kittens. Hank didn't hesitate. He gathered every trap he could find. 5 in total. All laid out in a wide arc around the far woods. Silent. Illegal. Dangerous. He dismantled each one by hand, jaw tight, fingers raw from the cold. Then he took the beer can, the butts, and every scrap of trash and stuffed them into a sack. He buried the mess in a compost pile where no one would find it. And then he waited. The men came back 3 nights later. Hank knew because he was ready. He sat on his porch in the dark, shotgun across his knees, lantern by his feet. Around midnight, headlights flickered at the edge of the road. A truck. 2 men. They parked near the trees and stepped out with flashlights. Bet that cat's been back, one said, laughing. Yeah, the other replied. I brought something special this time. Bear scent. Draw her in good. Hank didn't give them a chance to say anything. He stood up and cocked the shotgun. Both men froze as the lantern flicked on. You boys lost? Hank asked, voice cold as the snow around them. They turned, startled. We were just, This is private land. You've got 10 seconds to get in that truck and disappear. They didn't argue. The truck vanished into the night, tires spinning in panic. Hank stood there for a long time after, watching the dark tree line. The lantern flickered gently in the wind. The shotgun was still in his hands, but his heart was warm. He wasn't just protecting goats anymore. He was protecting them. The next morning, something changed. On the stump where he usually left the food, there was something waiting for him. A dead rabbit. Perfectly placed. Untouched. A gift. He stared at it, stunned. She had left it there. Not because she needed to. But because she wanted to. A thank you. He smiled, a real smile that reached all the way to his eyes. No one's gonna believe this, he whispered. But that didn't matter. He didn't need anyone to believe it. He had proof. And he had something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Weeks passed. Then months. The snow melted. Spring crept in like a soft sigh. Buds bloomed on trees. Grass returned to the fields. And with the changing season came new signs of life. One afternoon, while tending to his garden, Hank saw a flash of movement near the orchard. 3 young bobcats. Playing. Tumbling over each other like clumsy kittens, wrestling and leaping in the tall grass. He stayed still, barely breathing, afraid to scare them off. And then, she appeared. Their mother. She stood at a distance, watching her young, but also watching him. They locked eyes once again. This time, there was no fear. No tension. Only understanding. He nodded once. She blinked, then turned and led her family back into the woods. That night, Hank sat on the porch and looked at the stars. He thought about how it had started, with blood, with anger, with a trap meant to kill. And now? Now it had become something else entirely. A bond. A silent agreement between two survivors. And the wild wasn't the enemy anymore. It was family. Summer arrived like a golden whisper. The hills turned green, the creek behind the barn flowed full again, and the days stretched long under a warm sun. Life on Hank Morris's farm found a steady rhythm, eggs collected, fences repaired, goats milked, fields tilled. But there was a new presence woven into the quiet of those days. The Bobcat family. They never got too close. But Hank didn't need them to. Just knowing they were out there, patrolling the woods, raising their young in the protection of the land, was enough. Sometimes, he'd catch a flash of movement near the tall grass. Sometimes, paw prints by the stump. And once, just before sunset, he spotted all three young bobcats perched on a low branch, watching the goats curiously, their mother sitting below them like a silent guardian. They had grown into graceful, strong creatures. Wild. Untouched by humans. Except for him. One morning in July, Hank woke to the sound of crows squawking. Something was wrong. He stepped outside, squinting at the sky. The birds were circling low over the woods. He felt it in his gut. He grabbed his coat and moved quickly toward the trees, shotgun slung across his shoulder more out of habit than need. What he found made him stop cold. Another trap. New. Shiny. Hidden near the edge of the clearing. And worse, blood. Not much. Just a few drops. But it was enough. His stomach turned. Not again. Then he heard it. A soft rustling. A pained whimper. He followed the sound to a small hollow, and found one of the young bobcats. Trapped. The metal jaws were clamped around its back leg, just like its mother had once been. It was struggling, panicked, eyes wide. But as soon as Hank stepped into view, it stopped. Their eyes locked. He dropped to his knees and whispered, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." He worked fast. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from urgency. He knew this pain. He'd seen it before. And he couldn't let it happen again. The trap finally snapped open. The bobcat limped free, collapsing to the ground. It looked at him, not with hate or fear, but with something that felt eerily like trust. Then, from the trees, the mother appeared. She didn't growl. She didn't run. She stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, until she stood between Hank and her injured young. And then, she did something he would never forget. She brushed her head, gently, against his boot. Just once. Then turned back into the trees, guiding her young one with her shoulder. That night, Hank couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring at the stump, at the woods beyond. How strange it all was. A man who once saw the wild as something dangerous, had become its shield. A creature he once tried to kill, had come to trust him with its child. The story was almost too perfect to believe. But Hank had lived it. And it had changed him. The next morning, he went into town. He asked the sheriff to post a sign, "No hunting. Private land." Then he donated 3 of his old goat shelters to the local wildlife rehab center. And when asked why, the quiet old man only said one thing. Because sometimes, what you think is your enemy, is actually your gift. Years passed. The bobcats came and went with the seasons. Hank grew older. Slower. But he never stopped watching the woods. Never stopped leaving food in the winter. Never stopped looking for paw prints in the frost. On his 70th birthday, the vet, Dr. Sutton, visited and brought him a framed photo, a young bobcat standing at the edge of the field, golden eyes shining in the light. It wasn't just any bobcat. It was her. Still watching. Still guarding. Still home. In his final years, Hank kept a journal. Not of crops or livestock, but of wildlife. Every entry began the same way. The bobcats came again today. His nieces and nephews didn't understand why he never fenced off the forest. Why he always left a section of his field untouched. Why he kept meat in the freezer, even when he no longer raised chickens. But one day, long after Hank passed peacefully in his sleep, they found his journal. They read every word. About the trap. The fight. The quiet bond. The trust. And about the moment when a man, broken by grief and anger, was made whole again, by a wild creature that should have feared him, but didn't. They cried. And they made a promise. To keep the land wild. To protect the woods. And to always leave something at the stump. Now, if you ever walk past Cold Hollow on a misty morning, you might see it. A stump near the trees, with a piece of raw chicken on top. And in the distance, a flicker of movement. A shadow in the tall grass. Two golden eyes. Watching. Not too close. But never too far. Just enough to say, "We remember."